It's kind of like here we go. Got it. It's like the middle of the day for me. I'm in between a couple of different projects right now. Um, so it's just kind of like, it's literally the middle of the week, middle of the day in the middle of the week, just like getting that last, not the last, getting that over that first push to get through the rest of the week, and then have a little bit of time off for the 4th of July, but not really, because I have the dog, and she doesn't like fireworks, so we tend to stay inside anyway. Like,
Yeah, it happens. I mean, hopefully we will help you push some energy into the rest of the week for you. Fingers crossed, we will try. I mean, the first thing that just we want to say is obviously, yeah, thank you so much for writing the book. But just going back, looking a bit about your background, I know you're Haitian.
Yes. So I can talk about that. Yeah. So my mom is Haitian. So like from Haiti, from literally a tiny little mountain town in Haiti. And I was just talking, I was at StokerCon at this point, maybe 2 weeks ago. It's the International Horror Writing Association. And we're talking about role horror. And yeah, I was like, oh yeah, I know like 2 types of rural horror. I know about like small town America, and I know a bit about like small villages in Haiti. That's where my family, my mom's family is from. My dad is good old fashioned Midwestern industrial town American. So it's just that's growing up like that is a bit interesting, because very like 2 very different distinct experiences. But yeah, no, my family's from Haiti. My Creole is not the best. I understand way more than I speak it. And I've lately been kind of dipping into some Haitian folklore, Haitian history, Haitian culture for my next few projects. That's been really exciting.
Brilliant. I mean, that what I was going to kind of lean to, because when I think of Haiti, just about the spirituality is such a core part of their identity. There's even a narrative that, they were able to see off their oppressors due to some of the spirituality that they used to support them in breaking free of the chains all the way back in, what was it, 1800s or so forth. So I
Yeah, yeah.
wondered if that was something that was important for you, and that's why you brought it into the book.
It's something that I feel like has always been there. So one of the projects I'm working on is my second book. It's called One of You, and it is very much talking about the immigrant experience in America, and the kind of like things that happen when, like, cultures don't quite like misfire with each other. But it's talking a lot about Haitian spirituality, the religious aspects. And it was something that in writing that book came out of a lot of things, but it really came out of, it took me a long time to realize that so many things I grew up with, not everybody does that. And I was like, there's been so many moments where I talk about things and people are like, Erin, yeah, that's your family. That's not, everyone doesn't do that. And there's always been this kind of slipstream to the idea of magic with my family growing up, and about how it's not even, I'm even loath to use the word magic. I feel like I'm going to have a very long talk with this with my editor later when I get my edits back for that draft. But how the like it's just a fact of life, like magic is a fact of life, and that there's this acknowledgement of being more than one plane of existence, and that sometimes you communicate with it, and sometimes they communicate back to you. And it just seems so much, I think one of the lines in the book, which hopefully will stay, I think one of the characters talks about the mundaneness of magic in Haitian culture. Like, it's just there, and you have to like exist in it, or sometimes deal with it and reckon with it. And so of course, when it comes to me being a storyteller, all that is just naturally in a lot of the work that I write. And so yes, I tend to write in genre, but in many ways genre to me feels more like reality than like realism, so to speak.
Thank you so much for that. I mean, I was just thinking about my family and growing up, and I remember that my older brother, he had a girlfriend that actually, I think he ended up marrying her, that no one liked. And then my mum was just like, yeah, the elders in the village said that they replaced his head with a chicken head. That's why he's so clueless and he's marrying her. And everyone was like, yeah, that sounds about right. Like, do you know what I mean? You would think
Yeah.
he was just so used to speaking in spiritual ways and spiritual warfare ways. You just think it's normal, but it isn't always normal. So I totally get that. But I'm going to give my voice a slight rest because everyone is itching to ask you questions. So I will throw it out to them. Maggie, did you have a question? Maggie here, I can't see her. I know she can't see Maggie. You really wanted to. Could you see her? I can't see anyone.
Yeah. Hello. It was a really great book. I really enjoyed it.
Thank you.
I don't know that I really had. I hadn't really thought of any questions per se, but I guess maybe one about just the style of it being like a thriller, horror-y style. Like, was that always something you wanted to write, that kind of direction? And is your new book a similar line, or are you going more like, I don't know, contemporary or something a little different?
So yeah, thank you. Yeah, I always wanted to in writing Jackal, I love mysteries. I think everything I write ends up being a mystery of some sort. And that really came from like that love was instilled by my mother. And my mother's love of procedurals on television, from like Law and Order to like Murder, She Wrote. My mom loved that show. And I so therefore watched the vast majority of it. And so I always wanted to make a mystery. And I think Jackal lends itself to being kind of a mystery. You can argue it's a serial killer thriller because mysteries in their fundamental nature, when you create them, they kind of break the world apart and then put it back together in a different kind of way. And I think that's really useful for a story like this. And also horror, like the horror elements can't be denied, and they're a huge part of the book. I really think that it's like a 50-50 like mystery thriller horror split. And I wanted to utilize horror because one of the most important aspects of that genre is that it asks you to be uncomfortable and to remain uncomfortable for as long as possible. And it's a great thing for that to happen for you as the writer and you as the reader. And this topic is not comfortable. And when it comes to, I just always, whenever I write horror, I write the things that terrify me. And like this terrifies me. Like the mishandling of justice in America terrifies me. Like being a Black woman in America terrifies me. And so I want to, explore and write from things that, keep me up at night, because if I'm not scared, then the reader's not scared. And then when it comes to like my next work, One of You is very firmly a suspense book. There is, the teeniest of, it's not even that much of a spoiler, but there is something, a little deeper going on that may or may not be rooted in some magic. But just like with Jackal, we don't really find out the truth until the very end. And then I'd argue that for One of You, the truth is a very hazy thing by the end of it. You're kind of like, maybe. And I wanted to move into suspense because that book is really pulling apart some good old-fashioned generational trauma. And it's really exploring sisterhood and what it's like being because it's two narrators, it's two sisters, and one is an older sister, one's a younger sister. So like, what's it like being, the firstborn daughter in an immigrant family? What's it like being the youngest daughter in an immigrant family? And how you have different expectations kind of pushed on you from your parents, from society. What does it mean to be successful? Like, what are you willing to sacrifice for that success? I would argue that if I can make a generalization about the immigrant experience, that immigrants are doing hustle culture before hustle culture was a thing. Like just outworking basically working ourselves to death. And it's the book is really trying to dismantle some of that, all through the lens of, of a pretty a pretty rivalrous sisterhood. And what does it mean to have what does it mean to be a sister versus like just being related to somebody? What does it mean to like own your sisterhood in a way? And it's been really like interesting to work with all that stuff. So there is like, I would argue this is book 2, there's definitely a horror element. Like it's just, I would argue that it's just eerie more than anything. The plot is basically, and this is, forgive me, I have not gotten my 1-sentence plot down, but it's these 2 sisters in the wake of their mother's death. They are put upon by this very close family friend that nobody knows, but she knows every single thing about them and this family. And as strange things start happening, these 2 sisters have to come together to figure out who this woman is and what she really wants. So it's like much more, if Jackal is about the systemic violences we do to each other, One of You is about the intimate violences we do to each other.
It's kind of got like a Inspector Calls vibe about it.
Yeah, kind of. Yeah, what did we had many a meeting. And I think the marketing team recently compared it to Jane Eyre, and even though we can't use this comp because of obvious reasons, The Brief Wondrous Life of Oscar Wilde.
Oh my God, I love Juno Diaz. Like, he's my favorite.
Yeah.
I know, obviously, due to
reasons, it's like we were talking, we're like, oh, that's a perfect comp, too bad we cannot use it. So we're looking for another one.
Definitely, but he's one of a kind. I actually was going to say we read one of his books, but anyway, this is how we lose her per se. But yeah, do you love that book?
I love all of his work. I mean, I still remember when I finished Oscar Wilde, I literally couldn't stand up. Like I was just floored by that book.
Beautiful. And Drown is good as well. I think Drown gets enough love. But anyway, sorry guys.
That's fine.
Yeah, it's about your book, not theirs. I mean, just a random question. Do you think Black people will ever be free of generational trauma?
I have no idea. Like I wish. I mean, I think that a lot of media, thank God, is finally starting to talk about it in very like specific and like hitting the nail on the head terms. I think that's the first step, is acknowledging it and saying like, hey, this is a thing. That's step 1. And then step 2 is like, how do we dismantle it? How do we, not pass these things on to our children or to the young people in our lives who are important to us? So yeah, I don't know. I hope so. It would be really nice. Yeah, I know there's like currently there's always, I feel like it's every few years it comes around, this big push to like not write about trauma, which I completely understand. Like, I totally understand that. But as a horror writer, it's really hard. I'm like, that's what my work really, like, that's where horror lives. It lives in trauma. I don't know how to not do it. But at least I hope that the traumas that I'm pulling up are for a good cause and are not done. There's many different branches in the horror genre, and I know that, at least for me, I don't like using horror and violence and trauma as a means of surprise. I like to use it with like reason and intentionality, and there are people who do it for surprise, and that's really good for them and they're very good at it, but that's just not me.
No, absolutely. I'll throw it out to the crew. Colleen, you're unmuted.
I loved it, Erin. I kind of, when I was when I first discovered books, I was like reading Stephen King, and no one was Black in them books. Just saying, no one was Black. So the fact that these characters, it just made me feel more invested. It was very real. I was saying before you came on, I watched this documentary about these Black women who were drug users. One nearly got killed, went to the police, they didn't believe her. It just really resonated with me about the whole kind of Black women being of less value, not mattering, and that sort of generational trauma, that difficult relationship between the mum and the daughter. yeah, I love the mystery, I love the story, the different layers. Yeah, and the fact that, you know, parts of the story were real. You know, this is real life. Your reflections at the end, like, were really really quite moving as well, because you gave us so much of your story in that story. So I just really like that. I really like that. So yeah, I don't really have a question. It's just more of a, I love the book, basically. Give me more.
One of us. One of us.
Yeah, I mean, thank you so much. I mean, that's a lot of, like, all of people ask you, you know, who do you write for? And I always say I write for myself first. And it was just, I was sick of not seeing the stories of missing Black girls being portrayed like in a very, like, I would argue, like this large, in a large grand way, the way it deserves to be. And I was sick of, especially my hometown, which is like Appalachia, being so whitewashed. I'm like, there are so many people of color in Appalachia. I don't understand why this is not a thing. And so that was another big reason behind. Sorry, that is a package. I'm so sorry.
Well, while Erin's gone, I'll tell you a joke that happened at work. So there's this guy from Liverpool who's a bit of a character, and we were talking about him in our little huddle. And apparently he's got a Japanese wife and he's a really outgoing kind of person. And so my manager said, it's really good to have diversity in the team. And I was like, he's only from Liverpool. But then, this is the real killer. But then someone else piped up and said, there was this tragedy somewhere in the Caribbean. And we were like, where? Like, what country are you talking about? Haiti. Remember in Haiti? And we were like, oh, yeah, Haiti. There was some unrest in Haiti. He said, well, you know what the Liverpudlians done? They put loads of Liverpudlians, loads of Scousers on an aeroplane, flew them to Haiti to help them loot. So the joke just went that much further.
Oh, it's like way to throw in racism and classism and probably some sexism. Like, at this point, I just assume.
Welcome to the NHS. We're 75.
We've got trauma stories there.
Sorry. I deeply apologize. I mean, I can't control when packages come to my apartment, but it's just like, of course, like the 30 minutes where I'm like, oh, I really hope that nobody contacts me. That's when my package arrives. But yeah, when it comes to representation, I just really wanted to write something, and to write something that felt authentic, even though, you know, like there's not a string of missing Black girls in my hometown. There is not a shadow monster that lives in the woods in my hometown. But I just wanted to write about some of my childhood experiences, some of my, like, I was just so sick of not seeing characters who felt like me on the page, that I just wanted to do that. And it was really fascinating. Like, when I started Jackal, like, yes, it's like Liz was extraordinarily similar to me when I started this book. And then by the end, I was like, girl, what are you doing? Like, she took on a life and a story of her own. She was off doing things. And I'm like, I would have left. Like, I would have been like, that's really bad. But that's me. And that's why I'm not leading books, I'm writing them. So
just speaking of writing, I mean, I read your good reviews. You dropped it in there, mic drop, and then ducked out.
oh yeah, I like to, in the many different, like, things about debuting, it's a very strange process. Some people in my debut class were like, oh, I don't engage with Goodreads at all. Oh, like, getting it set up is also a bit like having to be vetted by the FBI. Like, they do not believe that you're you. And I'm like, I promise you, nobody else wants this profile. It's just me. And I just wanted a place to like drop in any trigger warnings because I don't think my publisher put them in the front of the book. So I'm like, here's what you're getting into. If it's like, if you need that. And then I also just wanted, I don't know, just a moment to acknowledge myself as a reader, where I'm like, I wrote this book for myself, but I'm also like, I'm not just a writer, I'm also a reader. And I just wanted I don't know, and some of my friends, they write reviews on their books on Goodreads, and they're very, very funny. And who knows, maybe like book 3 or 4 I'll write a very funny Goodreads review. But I do like to see the author being like, hey, I did my best. And that's really what I feel like that Goodreads review is. I will say that I don't read reviews. I don't go on Goodreads, I don't go on Amazon. I barely read trade reviews. I mean, my marketing team sends them to me. So I'm like, oh, okay. And they'll ask me about pull quotes. So then, then you kind of end up reading it anyway. But I do my best not to engage with reader spaces as a writer. I don't think it's healthy for writers or readers. It's like reader spaces are for readers. And so I'm like, go forth. Because I know the amount of times that somebody has posted either a negative review or a positive review and has actually made me want to read a book even more is like so many times. Like, oh, I'm trying to think. It's like something just came. One of my mentors, her book is a romance. She writes adult romance, and the romance has to deal. It's with millennials and financial struggles. And she got a negative review that said like, oh well, I don't think people who want escapism will like reading about, financial struggles. And I'm just like, I want a romance that talks about finances, please. Add to cart. Yeah.
Totally. I'm going to throw it out to who else would like to ask the question. Becky, go for it.
Yeah, I'm trying to form this into a question. I, like everyone else, loved the book. I loved the you being very forthright with the, I guess, experiences you had, but also putting them into the book about kind of, when you're the only, or like the one of two in a school. That's how I grew up as well. So it really resonated. And I guess my question is like, did you have any thought of how much you did want to put out there into the world? Because I know, especially as Black authors, we feel like you can just be like diluted in how we talk about actually the experiences that we do have. So yeah, I mean, what was your thought around that?
Yeah. So I'm trying to think of who told me this. It might have been one of my professors, because I revised this book while I was in graduate school. And that process, it sounds crazy, but it helped a lot. And I think one of my professors there, we were talking about a scene and someone's like, oh, is it too much, blah, blah. And he basically said, he's like, if you're not scared, you're not writing close enough. He's like, if it doesn't feel a little too personal, and scared being like, oh, this feels a bit too vulnerable, I feel too seen. He's like, it's not close enough. And as I was working on Jackal and working with my editor, I'm trying to figure out the best way to phrase this, but when I got my first edit letter back and went into those revisions and then turned in the subsequent draft, I kind of almost wanted to warn my editor and be like, this is a lot. I mean, this is a lot. Her name is Jenny. This is a lot, Jenny. But it's just what the story demands of you. And I would say that people can tell when you're lying. I would argue that that's any art. I come from an acting background. I used to be an actress. And there's that thing of the dirty secret of acting is that you're just telling the truth. You learn better and better ways of telling the truth. And I would argue the exact same thing for writing. People can tell when you're lying, and you can obviously wrap the truth up in different means, change the character, change the circumstances. But at the end of the day, your job is to tell the truth. And so, yeah, I mean, it was among all of the debut anxiety, there was definitely that anxiety about being seen in a way where it's like, oh, I don't know. What if people are like, what the hell is this? And those folks are out there. They thankfully do not tag me all that frequently. Some do, and I'm like, what are you doing? But yeah, I mean, there's always that fear of vulnerability. But then I remember, like, I'm doing this because I haven't seen that vulnerability. And one of my favorite bits of feedback that I get from readers, or readers saying, it's like, thank you for being so vulnerable about these experiences, because I just don't see them. And like, that's whenever I get too nervous, remember, like, I'm like, that's what this is about. It's about being able to see yourself in a medium, in a different form. And therefore there's that whole thing where it's like, we are the stories we tell ourselves about ourselves. And for so long, we haven't been telling our own stories. And so it's like, it's telling that story like over and over again, and hopefully redefining some parts of our identities. So I mean, like, yeah, like being vulnerable is scary, but that's kind of the job. One of my ways of coping with it is to like wrap it up in a bunch of genre fiction, or like put it in a mystery, or like make a shadow creature in the woods. So
Thank you. And I guess I will follow on with that. How did you kind of, was it always in your mind that you wanted to actually link that, like, I guess, undercurrent of racism, or sometimes like full whack, to the tense like suspense that you have throughout the entire book? There were times I had to stop because I felt so claustrophobic of just of like the atmosphere. It's almost quite reminiscent of like Get Out, where like it just feels slightly off kilter. But yeah, do you from when you started, did you want to link that to race and the experience there?
Absolutely. It became like, you have to laugh to keep from panicking, or to keep from crying in this case. And I think me and my editor had like a running theme of like, is it horror or is it racism? And like, that was just, I wanted that question to be going back and forth the entire book, the entire time. You're like, is this just like a microaggression, or is there something, or is there like bodily harm about to happen? And I'm like, that's what, like, sometimes I'm like, that is occasionally my experience. And so I want to talk about that, and I want that to be horrific, because it is horrific, especially when things are super casual. You're like, whoa, what did that mean? And yeah, there's a lot of, I'm always flattered to any comparison to Jordan Peele. And I think that his work, especially Get Out, does that extraordinarily well, where you're just like, are these just like well-meaning white people, or is something else going on? And I just yeah, I took that and just really ran with it for Jackal.
Yeah, you definitely nailed it. I thought it's so well, like so many times I was like, is this racism or is something really bad about to happen? Oh.
That suspense element, isn't it? Debbie. Oh, Debbie's unmuted herself. Sorry, Kathy. Debbie, do you have something to say? Away from Australia.
Yeah, I'm going to try to make this more question than observation, because I've got so many thoughts going on. The comparison to Get Out is very strong. I thought of it many times when I was reading this book. That thing of like, this thing is horror, and yet it is entirely believable that it could happen in real life. I thought that was really powerful, because there's so much horror that is, it might be talking about things that are real, but it's very doing it in a very metaphorical way. But this genre of horror is talking about real things that are horrible. And it just, I don't know, it's very powerful. But what I wondered was, is that a strange, because when I think about the psychological place that you sit in to try and write something like this, it feels like sometimes it would be almost a relief to acknowledge what is real. And then other times it would be a little traumatic to acknowledge what is real. And I just wondered, like, I don't know, not only what is that experience, but I kind of want to ask other people in here, even if it's after, you know, like when we're talking later, just what it's like to write it, but also what it's like to read it, you know?
I would say there's definitely a question there. When it comes to writing trauma or writing experience or writing things like this that can feel so close to the bone, so to speak, and so real, it is a bit of a relief, because so much, and there's, you know, a very strong thread in this in the book of like gaslighting that happens when it comes, especially around like fear as a Black woman. It's like, no, it's like, what do you mean? That's not happening. You're being too sensitive. Like, that's ridiculous. And just like writing it down and putting it out there can feel like a relief to be like, no, but this is like, you know, it kind of makes it into a real thing. And so therefore kind of pushes against the gaslighting effect. And then when it comes down to it, it's like, how does it feel to engage with that part of yourself? I mean, it can feel, you know, it's obviously probably, I'd argue, the most like intellectualizing one can do when it comes to that. And it can just be super helpful to just kind of to write it down and turn it into something and to make it into like a journey for someone to go on. I mean, like I've read, I think I've read Jackal. I think I figured it out. I think I've read it like 50 times. Like I've read it. Yeah, they joke about you write the book you love, and I'd add because you're going to read it a whole bunch of times. And so I don't know, but I feel like my reader experience is a bit strange because I feel like it's like when somebody who builds a car drives a car. Like I'm looking at like all the stuff going on behind the scenes and things. I can't really experience it brand new. But I do know that like when I got the idea for the story, I really wanted to engage in that, like a bit of that like kind of legendary folklore quality that can happen, and that like thinking about the folk tales that we tell ourselves, they're really violent. They're really violent and awful and a little traumatic, but they're also the things that, you know, at least when I grew up, like what you tell your kids before you go to bed. You're like, the real story of the Little Mermaid is awful. The real story of like Cinderella, also terrible. But there's something in us that I think really likes looking at the thing. We like looking at the horrifying thing, and it can be a source of comfort in some weird way.
It already reminds me of like Jordan Peele forgot his second film. That
Us.
The third one, sorry. The third one.
Nope.
Nope. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. It reminds me of that, looking at that horrifying thing, but still being drawn to it, even though it's still a car crash, being about spectacles, isn't it? And I think the reason why we invest in fairy tales is because we are going to be given that happy ending, whilst in reality that isn't. You're right. It's the Cinderella is horrible. Seven Dwarfs, like, these are horrible stories. That John Red is the worst.
Yeah.
But yet we invest in it, and we pass these folklores down to our children because the payoff is that it's a happy ending, but that isn't life, is it? Like, especially for people who are Black and brown, that they may not be a happy ending, isn't there? And it just made me think again about all these films that are coming to me. I don't know if you've watched Swarm on Amazon Prime.
I've started Swarm. That is a fascinating pilot. I was like, okay, this is where we're gonna go. Cool.
The pilot was interesting. Please watch it for those who've got it. It's Swarm, but it's an element of like Black horror as well. But there's an element about Black people going missing and dying. And it's based on many true stories, basically, that happened, and how no one cares. Like, no one cares about us. Same with like in Nigeria, when there's 300 girls just sort of disappeared out of one village, and then we're asking people to find them. Do you know what I mean? Like, well, how can 300 people go missing in one day? So I guess I just wondered, I mean, I think in this book, particularly of Liz, we talk about her self-esteem, comparing it to her white best friend, and you know, microaggression coming from a small town and so forth. And I just wondered about relating it back to you, about your own self-esteem as a Black woman. Obviously, sorry for getting too deep into, so please, but I just wondered, do you feel more celebrated? Do you feel more in your skin now as a Black woman? Or do you still feel that we are marginal? Like, do you still feel kind of left over, marginalized, and kind of forgotten, like some of the women in these stories?
The stories. I mean, part of me is like, it depends on the day. But I would argue that especially since transitioning over into being a full-time writer, I feel a lot more like my authentic self, which then inherently breeds self-confidence because you're doing something that is speaking to your higher self and not something that you feel like is just not you. So like, yeah, and that's I feel much more self-confident in like this iteration of me. And but it's like those that thing of healing is not a linear journey. It's usually circular. You're going to go back through the same things over and over again, and it's like I feel that way sometimes, but definitely not all the time. And it's just, I would argue, like there's a bunch of, not to get too woo-woo, there's like a bunch of things about how healing is circular, like grief is circular, love is circular, and that thing of they're literally called floating heads, and you're going to face them over and over again, and it's just about like, how do you defeat them faster? And it's like, how do you recognize something faster? How do you get through it faster? It's accepting that those feelings of self-doubt, those feelings around having less confidence, they're going to fluctuate and they're going to change, and that, you know, they're going to come back in new and exciting ways, and it's up to you to like progress on your, you know, on your healing journey. But I would definitely say that I'm, you know, much further along than the feelings that I was tapping into to create Liz and creating her backstory and creating, of all things, it was like I had like done the healing, and I was like, hey, like, you know, on this part of my healing journey, I kind of was like, hey, that journey was really hard. I think it would be really helpful for people to see what that journey was like. You know, and so like, you know, it's like but you're kind of like with a lot of healing, you know, goes back to childhood, go back to like to adolescence, like all that stuff is, you know, still rattling around in people, you know, for the rest of their lives. It's just about how you learn how to process it, how to deal with it.
And I guess writing is one of those many ways. I'm very mindful about the time. I know we only promised us that I only begged for 30 minutes, but I just want to give everyone a final chance. If there's anyone that wants to ask a question, this is your time before the next book comes out. And then, you know, we beg Erin again to come back. So anybody who hasn't asked a question, this is, or would like to ask a further one, this is your final opportunity. So please do.
I'm really curious about like your writing process. And earlier on you talked about like Liz, and it almost felt like she kind of developed as you were writing the story. And I was wondering, like, with the kind of the twist at the end where we find out who the villains are, did you have like a few candidates kind of lined up in your mind and then you chose it as you kind of got to the end of the writing process, or was it all like mapped out before?
So Jackal, oh God, this book. So first, you know, my first book that I've written, and I did it like the way they tell you not to do it, which is I just like sat down and wrote the whole thing chronologically and like really just fumbled my way through that first draft. And then basically I did not have an outline or a structure. I now work with outlines or structure because what I learned in writing Jackal was that if you don't have one, you're gonna have to do it at some point. And so it's like I figured out character and theme and tone and all that, but then had no structure. So I spent most of my revisions putting a structure on this thing. So to answer, like, you know, did I know who the villains were? I mean, I always knew who and what Jack was. But yeah, when it came down to like who's like the person, no. When I first started the book, my first draft, I was like, oh yeah, now I need to like pick a villain. So I just kind of like made someone, and then, you know, through revisions and feedback was like, no, you have to like really think about this and all that. And I'm trying, what was the last, one of the last things to fall into place in revisions was a big arc of Chris. for a long time, I'm like, oh, she just has a love interest, woo, and like that was just it. He just like existed to be pretty. And my editor and a couple of my critique partners are kind of like, I think they're like, you need another suspect because it was just becoming way too obvious by like process of elimination. And so Chris emerging as the red herring was like one of the last things to come into place in revisions. And then by the time that happened, I'm like, oh, it makes so much sense. Like, of course it's him. You think of like, of course you think it's him because it's like the worst person it could possibly be. But yeah, and then when it came to actually picking Doug, that happened earlier in revisions. And then I don't know. Apparently, that's like, it's like, I don't know why I picked him. Like, I was just like, oh, I think it's going to be this guy. And then kind of like with Liz, just then suddenly he had a wife. Suddenly his wife is like the most fascinating character. Every revision, Kirsten got more and more interesting to the point where we had to pull her back a bit because I'm like, she's way too fascinating. And she's like giving away too much. I think she's only in like 3 scenes in this entire book. And yet she's like one of the most vivid and like fascinating characters. I adore her. She's absolutely insane. Like, she's great though.
Thank you.
No one else has any final questions? I just wanted to say, I know you said you've read your book about over 50 times. I just wondered which part in your book is hard for you to read.
What is the hardest part to read? I mean, like, I'm a bit of a perfectionist, so like, a lot of it is hard because it's like, oh, what if I started to, like, I know and by the end of revisions, I was tinkering a bit too much and I had to stop myself and be like, it's done. There's like nothing more to be done. And like the different parts are hard to read for different reasons. Like the girls' chapters are always hard to read because they're just so emotional. I'm like, but they're really pretty, so I like reading them. And then I feel like the second half of the book with Liz is sometimes really hard to read because I do, drag her through hell a bit back there. And she just has to face, everything she's been running from. And that's always really hard to do as a writer. There's that old adage, which is absolutely true, is like, when you're revising your works, 9 times out of 10, you have to look at a scene and go, okay, how can I make this worse? I already know the scene that's the hardest is when like Liz and Mel have their like friend breakup. That's just really, really rough. But yeah, because like you're sitting at, especially in, when you're trying to push through with pacing wise, you always go, how can I make this worse? And it's difficult, but you know that it's for the best in the end, because the reason we read stories, or the reason that these characters have to go through, like they have to go through something. If they don't go through something, we just, with the endings can sometimes feel a bit unearned. And the ending of this book was one of the hardest thing. I think that was, talk about the last thing to come into place. The ending was the last thing to come into place. Originally, this book had a very devastating ending. And I just had to look at why it had that ending originally, and then could it end another way? And I tried like the happy ending, and that also felt false. And so then we finally landed on like, what is the most honest ending? And that's the one that we got. And I can completely understand how it can be infuriating to some people, because it was infuriating to me, but it felt honest. I'm like, the moment that I was like, no, it's that Mel dies and that's the reason anything stops, just felt completely, utterly frustrating and correct. Like, yeah.
Thank you so much. Thank you for coming. I know, like I said, you've got another book, probably loads more deadlines to come. And I know you said that you're also like, you kind of stopped acting, because I'm like, you've got like so many degrees. You've got like 2 masters.
Too many degrees, yes.
I got water and reading all your amazing accomplishments. And so I just wondered, when you're like a multidisciplinary artist, is it hard to pick a love, or are you now settled in in writing books as opposed to say plays or acting?
So yeah, I did officially, like, at least acting is on hiatus as of January of this year, just because quite frankly, I have so many writing responsibilities that just the demands of acting were getting in the way. Like, I don't know if anyone, but it's like you have to, especially now post or wherever we are in COVID, we have to, your self tapes are the norm now. And a self tape can take you like an hour. And if I'm already working 6 to 8 hours a day, it's like, well, I could, write 2,000 words, or I could work on this audition. And they were starting to come on the faster side again. During COVID, they slowed down where you probably had about a week in advance. I'm like, I could do that. But now that, we're figuring out ways of filming and rehearsing safely, they're going back to being less than 24 hours. I'm like, I can't do that, especially when writing is paying my bills and auditions are like, I'm doing another job interview. So acting has been on hiatus. Then when it comes to writing, I feel very much like a multidisciplinary writer. Like, I had a play premiere I guess at this point, oh my goodness, like 6 months ago, off Broadway. I've been working on, I trained in film and TV writing. I've been trying to get, pending writer strike, I'm trying to get staffed on a couple of TV shows. But I see myself writing and kind of staying in writing in all of its capacities a bit more. So I don't think I'll ever only write books. I would definitely feel like I want to write teleplays, I want to write screenplays, I want to write plays, and I want to write novels.
I can see you writing something for Issa Rae.
Oh, it'll be fun. That'll be so
Yeah.
great. I promise I have a sense of humor. I do. I really do.
Oh, I'm sure, but I think maybe Jordan Peele was more, do you know what I mean? Get on his stuff, right? I think that's more your genre. But just thank you so much for writing such a masterpiece. I think we can all agree. Giving voices to many voiceless experiences of Black women, and more importantly, just bringing yourself to the group. And I don't know, I just always feel like it's a bit weird, like going into Zoom, like what kind of randoms are going to be on here. So thank you for being brave enough to come on here, and yeah, we're going to continue to promote your book. Thank you for your time, and just waiting for your next one. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you all for having me. Y'all are lovely, not randos. Like, so sweet. Yeah, that's so sweet. Had great questions. Thank you for reading and enjoying Jackal. Yeah, and this was a great way to kind of like go to the end of my work day. So
I remember, like, you got UK fans out here, man. Europe, come through, in it. Pull up, as they say.
Yes, I would love to. Maybe the next book. We'll see.
Yes, we shall. Thank you again.
All right.
Thank you and gratitude.
Liz,
Take care. Bye.
do you want to